Event designed in accordance with the conference theme of Be the Change You Want to See, as it applies to women, what women can contribute via leadership activities. My name is Liz Yoder, and this is Julia Partridge, and we will be co-moderating this forum. The goals of this panel discussion are to showcase successful women in science, technology, engineering, mathematics, and medicine, collectively known as STEM, hear about their trajectories, including the choices they've made and the challenges they've encountered, and learn from them any tips that we could use to succeed in our own trajectories. Another goal is to address in practical terms the real-world problem that many women in STEM face when they lean in, only to find that their actions are met with increased and heavy resistance.
We are fortunate to have with us today a very distinguished panel of campus leaders. I must admit I am a little bit in awe and very, very nervous to be up here with them. We have Dr. Bess Marcus sitting in the middle. Dr. Bess Marcus is the chair of the Department of Family and Preventive Medicine. She conducts research on physical activity behavior, and she has participated in the American Heart Association, American College of Sports Medicine, Centers for Disease Control and Prevention, and National Institute of Health panels, which have created the recommendations on the quantity and intensity of physical activity necessary for health benefits. Her work increasingly focuses on promoting physical activity in underserved and vulnerable populations. Dr. Kit Pogliano, here on our left, is currently professor in the section of molecular biology and chair of the UCSD Academic Senate. Her research is focused on understanding how bacterial cells are organized during growth, development, and antibiotic treatment. She has developed cell biological tools to rapidly identify antibacterial molecules and characterize their likely cellular targets. She serves on a variety of national and international scientific advisory boards, including the National Institutes of Health, the American Society for Microbiology, and the Max Planck Society. Dr. Margaret Leinen, on the right, is the director of the Scripps Institution of Oceanography here at UCSD, as well as the Vice Chancellor for Marine Sciences and the Dean of the School of the Marine Sciences. She is an award-winning oceanographer, and her research focuses on ocean sediments and their relationships to global biogeochemical cycles and the history of the Earth's ocean and climate. Her previous leadership roles include service as Vice Provost for Marine and Environmental Initiatives and as Executive Director of Harbor Branch Oceanographic Institute and as Assistant Director for Geosciences and Coordinator of Environmental Research and Education at the National Science Foundation. Welcome. So for our first question, we'd like to ask each panelist to speak about your own career trajectory, highlighting the toughest choices or challenges you have encountered and how you have conquered them.
Who wants to go first? Okay, so I can go first. Is the microphone working well? Okay. So I think from the time I was a teenager, I knew that I wanted to be a scientist and that I wanted to be a professor at a university. And so I went to the University of Washington, immediately started doing research, and that was all great, publishing papers. And then I went to apply to graduate school, and somehow I ended up reading the letter from one of my two research advisors. This was shared to me at some point, for reasons I don't exactly understand. And at that point, I read his letter, said that Kit, no doubt, will have a fabulous career in science as long as she doesn't have a family. And I'm like, really? Seriously? I didn't know I had to make this choice. And so I think that, no doubt to me, that balancing the family and the career is something that has been a challenge to me. But I have to say that I refuse to really compromise either my family or my career going forward. And so I had my son when I was at the end of graduate school, at an age where my mother and family had given up on me ever getting married or having a family. So it wasn't really that old by today's standards at all. And the compromise that we really had to make the balance of me not compromising my career and not compromising my family is really two. I think one, first, I have a fabulous husband who's really supportive, and we have a very equal relationship in child rearing. But the second is that we made serious financial compromises by always having in-house childcare, so that if my son was sick, neither of us had to miss work if it was a mild illness. And so we really compromised our financial, our ability to go do fun things, to be able to balance our work and life. So I think that's remained something of a challenge here, but it's a lot easier as a faculty member than it is as a graduate student or postdoc.
So, Kit mentioned always knowing she wanted to be a scientist. Growing up in a household where my father was a rabbi and my mother was a social worker, I always knew I was going to do something related to the helping professions and had a lot of aspirations to be in academia, as my father was. In terms of trajectory, I went to grad school in clinical psychology and have, besides the career-family balance, I also struggle with my balance of doing research, teaching, and service and leadership because I love all those parts of my job. Going to Kit's point about choices, for me, is never a question. I did hear comments like Kit was told about, stay focused on what you're doing, don't get distracted with the family, those kinds of things. I ignored all of those. But I did find it challenging that there weren't role models of women, lots of great role models in my career, but there weren't role models of who I wanted to be in terms of that balance of career and family. And it sounds like Kit, a very, supportive husband, and we run our house together in all these aspects. I have 3 kids that range in age from 9 to 23. And anyway, so I think the idea of having role models and not being limited by what other people tell you you can do.
My trajectory was a little, the latter part of it was very similar, but it started off in a different direction. I wanted to be a lawyer, and I was very enamored with a television show at the time that I was a little girl growing up, Perry Mason. And Perry Mason was everything that I and my family were not. He was glamorous, he drove around in a convertible, he solved people's problems, he had secretaries, he had assistants, and it just seemed like a wonderful, wonderful life. And it was very different from my life. So I thought I would be a lawyer, and I would help people and so forth. And along the way, I ran into a wonderful and charismatic science teacher. And he showed me that science was about solving problems and that it absolutely had everything to do with daily life, and got me into doing research after school and in high school, and that was the end of law. I was on my way to science. My parents were appalled when I became a science major because they thought that I would be a grade school teacher, and they couldn't envision how I would make money if I didn't do that. So after a while, my father decided that I was a geologist, so he decided that I would be a secretary in a geology company or an oil company, and that was, for him, he was able to kind of get that all together. And of course, I never did that, and later, he was very pleased with what had happened in my life, and he said that he couldn't figure out how I figured it out when he couldn't figure it out. And I still am not sure where that sense was, except maybe envisioning that science teacher that I had and the joy that he had in what he was doing. I think one of the tough decisions that I had to make was giving up my lab when I didn't have to give up my lab and my teaching when I first became an administrator, a dean. But a few years after that, I was invited to go to the National Science Foundation and to be in charge of Earth, atmosphere, ocean, and environment there. And I couldn't keep my lab going. And that was a really tough decision. And yeah, I think it was the right decision. I wouldn't say I've had no regrets. I look at people like the two women who are here who, you know, are actually still doing it every day. And I'm very envious of that when I see my colleagues, you know, solving big problems. I'm envious of it, but I love what I do. Like you, I struggled with the issue of role models. And then once I became a dean, I was very fortunate. They hired a new provost, and it was a woman. And that was the first time that I had to answer to a woman. And it was very interesting how the stress level for me went down. And part of it was that she just had an amazing personality. She was one of the most witty people that I've ever known, and that wit and easy charm came through in her meetings. But since then, I had had a woman as my boss for 25 years until I came to UCSD 7 months ago. So in a recent conversation with the Chancellor Khosla, I told him he was still on approval because I had to figure out what it was like answering to a man again. And he said, "Don't hold it against me." No, he's been fantastic. But there's definitely a difference, and it has to do with shared experiences and a sense of what I thought somebody that was the person that I reported to would understand about the way that I felt about things, the approach that I took. And I'm learning, I learn every day with Pradeep that those feelings aren't restricted to one sex or the other. I think it just is a little easier.
Thank you for those insights, and I'm happy to say that everyone in our audience will not suffer the lack of a good role model with all of you here. So now we'd like to pivot the discussion a little bit to the topic of women leaning in, a phrase made popular by Sheryl Sandberg's recent book called Lean In. And leaning in can mean a number of things. Very simply, it can mean just taking an initiative of some sort. But I think as Sandberg intends it, it actually means focusing and endeavoring to accomplish something that is very difficult, digging in, actually, and doing something that's challenging. Sandberg encourages women to embrace a personal fortitude and to be bold and daring. She encourages women to not allow personal and family goals to either slow professional advancement or dim professional aspirations. In other words, she says you don't have to completely choose one way or the other, you have to find a way to make it work. She implores women to foster an equity of shared responsibilities from housekeeping to leadership with men and to not spend most of their time existing in a primarily supportive role. However, her book stops short of addressing the all too common consequences of what happens sometimes when women do lean in. And in today's forum, we'd like to expound on those consequences, the problems they pose, and hopefully come up with some ideas for how to either solve the problems or develop strategies for working around them. Many of the problems that can occur when women lean in arise when there is a strong pushback or resistance to the acts of leaning in. In some cases, it is severe enough to involve intimidation, sabotage, and denial of support from those who resent or dislike the display of initiative and strength and expect more subservient behavior. In other cases, the consequences are less egregious and manifest as dismissiveness, marginalization, and misrepresentation of strong women leaning in. Women leaders are particularly vulnerable to this blowback, and I think you have to have a lot of thick skin to be a successful leader. So, no? How do you do it? If you deal with someone who doesn't have the same shared experiences as your supervisor, or as those around you might resent your position, how do you handle the climate with that?
So I guess, I don't feel like I've faced those challenges, maybe because I have a very positive outlook on life and always try to find good in any situation, and that I stand up for myself and I work hard, I'm committed, I offer before I ask. I just try to be the best person I can be, and I have found that people go out of their way to help me be more successful. I mean, I don't, I've been told that my unassuming style actually helps me as a leader because people aren't threatened by me. I communicate directly, I'm very transparent, and I found a lot of senior men have really been the ones who've helped me in my career. I have stepped in and like I said, I offer before I ask, and I don't offer to be involved or to do things so that I will be asked to do something. Just, again, kind of doing the right thing by being a good colleague, a good member of a team. So I guess I haven't really felt those negative consequences from leaning in.
So, I was raised, I had two sets of parents, and one of my stepfather is a lawyer, and he was a Republican lawyer who defended the timber industry. And you can imagine that growing up in the 80s, that kind of went against the grain for a good liberal college student, right? And so I was used, and he treated me, very much like he was interrogating me at times. So he would really pull my chain just to get a reaction. He would purposefully push me and push the boundaries of what I believed to see if I could defend my left-wing positions against his right-wing, Republican views of the world. And that was incredibly strengthening for me as a young woman, because I learned that there are male ways of dealing with conflict, and that as a woman, you can just stand up to them and you can push back, and that there are guys that love to do this. To this day, I encounter this behavior, honestly. There's just people who love to needle you and see what will happen, right? And what happens if I tell you something that I know you'll hate? Will you jump down my throat, or will you just contradict me in a kind of a positive and strong way? And so I agree a lot with what Bess said. I'm a really positive person, and I'm very straightforward. I state my position, and I'm willing to be moved if my position is wrong, but I don't back down just because someone's taking an intimidating stance with me. I mean, that's just the way some people are, and you have to live with that. So.
Yeah, I would agree with those observations. Lots of people have different styles, and I've had as many situations where a female authority figure or person above me in whatever organization I was in was very tough to get along with, or extremely demanding, or kind of insensitive to what I was trying to do for them, as I have with men. And I think I like to tell people, it's not all about us. The person that you're working with or working for has they have their own life and they have their own problems that they're dealing with, and often things may be going on that you don't know about, and you interpret their actions toward you as only being related to their view of you. And there's just so much else going on around us in our lives, whether it's what that person is facing at home or with their kids, or what their boss is doing. And I think that sense of trying to be really true to yourself is really the key. I think that another thing that is involved with that is that Kit talked about was where those experiences were in your life that convince you that you have what it takes, or that your ideas are okay. And I also had a father who was extremely challenging, and very different from me in personality. And he was a 1940s kind of guy, and he had all kinds of little sayings. And so it was, use your head for something besides a hat rack. And, if everybody else jumps off the bridge, are you going to jump off the bridge too? And, whenever something came up, he had one of these little things. I was so sick of hearing them by the time that I left for college. But they were little, little body checks to say, you've got to stand up for yourself and you've got to be prepared to stand up to me. And that was very valuable.
Thank you. For the third question, what can we do as members of an institution, as faculty, as staff, as administrators, and students to empower people, not only in our everyday practices, but also in terms of the way we think of institutional policies, and not just on the university campus, but also outside of it, especially since all three of you have spoken of experiences as younger women. So how do we act in our everyday lives to empower people, especially for young girls in our lives who are aspiring to be female scientists and leaders such as you?
So, do you want me to? A couple of things. One is that I think it is our job to reach out to women and to be proactive and to offer to help guide them on the way. And certainly if they come to us, to facilitate that. And so I do that in my daily life. When a college student approaches me for an internship or something else, I will go out of my way to facilitate some connection for them. I think on the other side, besides that proactive stance, I feel a strong sense of responsibility to speak up in a variety of forums if I hear language that seems counter-supportive to women. So, sometimes you'll hear the same characteristics being described, but for a male candidate, the assertive kind of style is seen as a great leader, and the woman isn't always seen that way. Or comments sort of like the one that somebody said to Kit about not having a family, when you're talking about somebody, she has a young child. And, whenever I hear things like that, I feel an obligation to say, wait a minute, let's look at their CV. Let's look at the opportunity. Let's look at what they've done. There's all kinds of things about somebody's personal life that we also don't know. Just because you happen to know she has a child, or you happen to know, he's assertive. We just have to be really careful of that and just be the ones who jump in, because I think a lot of that bias is often unconscious. I've heard a lot of really great people make statements like that, and then when you correct them, they're like, thank you. I can't believe that I was speaking that way, and that shouldn't cloud my judgment. I'm not saying that everybody is, but I just feel like it's our job to just step in that way.
So I agree completely with this. And when I first became a professor, I arrived here and I had a 3.5-year-old son in tow. And I never spoke to my students or my colleagues about the challenges that I might be facing raising a child while I was starting up a lab. I very much tried to separate my professional and my personal life. And I've come to realize that that's a real mistake, that to be an effective role model to my students and my colleagues, I have to talk about this and really be very open about this. And it's not like I have anything to hide, right? Having a family and having a career, it's a wonderful thing that you can achieve. And the more we talk about it, the better it is. So that's one point I wanted to make. The second is that I think it is really critical, as Bess said, to examine our unconscious biases. For years, I served on the Academic Senate Committee on Committees, and where we choose the membership for our committees that are really the faculty leadership on this campus. And it's amazing how if you don't make a conscious choice to look for women or underrepresented minority leaders, it just doesn't happen. That has to be almost the very first thing you think about when you're picking people for leadership positions. And so, to me, it's really critical that whenever you're convening a group of faculty or students or staff to think about or work on a process or a policy, that you really think hard about including, and you reach out to individuals so that they can be a part of the conversation, so that they have a chance to develop their leadership skills as well. And so listening and being conscious of your choices is just really critical.
Yeah, so you've heard speak up and correct unconscious bias or other bias of that sort, and you've heard help others, and I definitely agree with both of those. I think that one of the things that I feel very strongly about is civility in the workplace, and I think that it's a way of when people engage in uncivil behavior with each other and over internet, it's so easy to just make ridiculous comments, that's another, I look at it as like the thin edge of the wedge of discrimination and excluding that's there. It's a way of excluding people and putting them down. And all of that, I think, is the slippery slope to unconscious bias and then to conscious bias. And so one of my very strong things is that I insist on civility amongst my staff, amongst all of the people that I work with, and I will take people to task over that, even if it's not a bias issue. It's that unconscious civility that I think just leads us down the path of putting people down. And whether we're putting them down because of their gender or because of their race or because of the field of science that they're in or any other piece, I think we have to fight against it.
Oh, that was amazing. Totally agree with that civility thing. I think that's quite a good point. It is admirable to encourage women to lean into their careers, but sometimes the most difficult challenge is not playing offense and leaning in, but also having to play defense. You haven't given a lot of examples of the kind of pushback that we're talking about, but I have a bunch of examples I could give, both from graduate students and colleagues and my own experiences. So maybe we can get to those in the question and answer section, but for right now, to close out the formal questions and inquiries, we wanted to ask if each of you would share a pearl of wisdom, a mantra, or a preferred piece of advice as a take-home message. So one example is there was a graduate student in physics who was the only woman in her class, and they were studying for their qualifying exam. And literally in the room, all of the guys in the class were up at the blackboard doing problems together as a team. And literally, she was sitting in the back of the room, in the corner, by herself, trying to study, almost in tears. So I had to do something. So I went over and talked to her. We set up our own study section. We did invite the guys to come to it, but I made sure she was, sitting right in the middle and as part of the session, and I gave her a mantra, and that was patience, focus, and gladness, because she had like a few weeks ahead of her of really intense studying for this exam. And when I first saw her in tears there, she was sure she was going to fail it. And she took this mantra, and when she finished her exam, of course she didn't know, it hadn't been graded yet, so she didn't know any official result, but she came and found me and said that she knows she passed it. So something that was just really, that really helped her to be able to think that, because it was a way of taking something that was challenging and having a very positive way of seeing it to keep yourself motivated to keep doing what you needed to do to succeed. Something maybe along those lines, if you've had anything like that.
Well, this isn't exactly like that, but just that your example reminded me of it. And I just think about, like, when you make the fact that you're a woman, when you bring that to the surface in a group of men, and the pros and cons to doing that. And so I often find it's not necessary to raise that issue. In other words, I guess I'm not articulating this well, but in that situation, I mean, I think what you did was great and certainly worked in that situation, but going back to the unconscious bias and unconscious things, and not to defend those guys, but were those guys consciously leaving her out, or is it just what happened? And could she have gone over and said, hey, can I study with you guys, or can I work on that with you? And so, I mean, I guess not that everything should become our responsibility and our burden, but I do think it's part of being proactive. And what I've found without fail in my career is that if I don't let that be an issue, it's not an issue for anybody. You know, and I just step in and I don't whine, I don't complain, I just step in and I don't act like a guy, I just act like an accomplished, confident person, and then I'm received well. So I just think that we have to be aware of that too, you know what I mean, and what we can each do in that situation, instead of assuming that being the only woman or something like that has to be a problem in making it an issue. So, I don't know.
Yeah, so I agree with that. I'll try to, so I guess I try to live as much of my life outside of my comfort zone or on the very edge of my comfort zone. So I get bored pretty easily. And I believe that if you always are doing what you're comfortable with, that you're not necessarily growing and you'll never know what you can really achieve. So I would just recommend to people to spend as much time as you can on the edge of your comfort zone so that your capabilities can actually expand throughout your lifetime. So that's kind of
Oh, that is such great advice. Wow. My favorite was a piece of advice that was given to me by one of the members of my dissertation committee. And it was at a time that we were both going through some very tough personal times, not together, but he had some very tough things going on in his life, and I did too. And we were sitting around after work one day, and he said, you know, in my case, I was facing a big decision. And he said, you know, you're treating this as though it was that you could actually make a decision. And he said, a decision is when you can weigh all of the pieces and know exactly what the outcome is. So you go to the grocery store and you buy a big box of cereal or a little box, and you know how many family members you have and how much money you have and how big your kitchen closet is, and so you can make a decision. And he said, you're struggling with something that can't be decided. He said, it's a commitment, and you don't know what a lot of the issues are, but you can't know that by just taking this one into consideration or this other one, that you'll come out with the right answer. And he said the nature of a commitment is that you have to be committed to it as well. And so when you make that choice, then you have the obligation to do everything in your power to have made that the right choice. And that was such a wonderful piece of advice for me. And it comes back to me every time I have to make a really, really difficult life choice.
You know, that's great. And just one thing I wanted to add about kind of mottos to live by that I didn't really mention before is, you know, very simple statement that was made to me during graduate school that just resonates constantly, and I say it often, which is, keep your eyes on the prize. Now, what that prize is might change, you know, whether that prize is a focus on one area or another. But you first have to know where you're going to get somewhere, and I think that that's the biggest message about that. And it's you that has to know. It's not what everybody else tells you about where you need to go. You need to look inside and find that, and then figure out how to stay focused on it.
Those were wonderful, thank you. One of my favorite things also that someone told me once is treat every obstacle as a stepping stone. So one of the things I like to tell students is don't ever be afraid of making mistakes. Just don't keep making the same ones over and over again. Right. There are plenty more out there that you're going to make. But I know Julia and I were talking when we were planning for this event, and Julia said one of her favorite parts of Sheryl Sandberg's book was where Sheryl talks about the slogan, I think she has hanging up in Facebook, where it says, do the thing you're most afraid of. And we thought that was actually kind of a good advice as well. Oh, and we wanted to mention very briefly, this is totally coincidental. We didn't know about this until we got here today. But if any of you have not read the book Leinen by Sheryl Sandberg, they're actually giving away a copy out in the lobby. There's a drawing you can enter if you aren't interested. Go to the Equal Opportunity Affirmative Action table. So we wanted to open it up now for some questions or comments from audience members. We have microphones on either side. Please come up and have your say.
Hello, thank you very much for your comments and closing remarks. Actually, one thing that I'm thinking about, there must be pretty lonely up there. You are not that many. You mentioned it by yourself. I mean, women on the top. So how do you deal with this? Are you reaching across the departments, across commissions to find female friends? I mean, let's face it, we like each other. We like friends. We like women friends. We like men friends too, but... And, or are you just going on, you just like it this way? I'm just curious. I'm reaching up, so I'm just trying to see where I will be. Who will I find there?
You know, I think it's a great point, and I think when I came here, I've been here for just about 3 years. I was at Brown University and very close to the Dean of Public Health there, and she said, you know, your position as chair of this department is really like being a Dean of Public Health, and it's going to be really lonely. And, you know, I valued her opinion so much because she tried very hard to keep me at Brown, but when I had that conversation with her about, okay, forget all that, you know, look me in the eye, what should I do? And she said, you should take that job out in San Diego. So again, that was a generous woman thinking about lifting other women up and not just self-serving for her institution. But one of the things, you know, we've stayed in touch, and one of the things that she offered to do after I accepted the position is to be one of the people I could reach out to, because what she said is, not only is it lonely, but most of what you know in your head you can't actually talk to anybody about, because it's too personal or it connects to something else like that. And so, you know, again, that was a generous woman reaching out to me to do that, and I tried to do the same, you know, for others. But I think it is a good point that we need to have comrades, and, you know, I've gotten to know Kit some too. I think I have 2 comrades here that I'm maybe reaching out to more. So it's a good point. I don't know if you want to add.
Yeah, so I agree with that. I mean, the things that you can't talk about do make you lonely, right? That's really hard. You have to internalize it and make the right decision on your own, and that's hard. But, you know, I have made close friends with powerful men and powerful women, and I find I can have friendships with many people across the campus, and getting to know Bess and Margaret has just really been fabulous. There are lots of strong women on this campus who I hope will increasingly be in leadership positions. There's no doubt we need to work on the leadership on this campus.
Yeah, friends are really important, and I'm blessed with 3 lifetime friends. We've been friends for over 40 years. We go away for a week together every August. None of them are scientists. We don't talk about science. It's a wonderful vacation. They keep me sane. But I think the other important piece is mentors. And there's a difference between a mentor and a role model. A role model is somebody like me up here who's achieved something, and you can look and say, you know, if she could do it, I could do it. A mentor is somebody who takes an interest in you and your success, and who actually is a person that you can talk to about your career and about the decisions you have to make. And they're exceedingly important. There was an amazing study that was done by Ann Prescott at Haverford University on the success of men and women in graduate school. And one of the things, there were a lot of great insights in her study, but one of the really ones that just kind of hits you right between the eyes is that every single one of the male PhDs that was surveyed, and this was several thousand over a period of 25 years from a major land-grant institution, could identify a mentor, and only 15% of the women could identify a mentor. And, that study was done almost 10 years ago, but it was, it's a really important thing. And we, if you don't have a mentor, find one. Go ask somebody to work with you. It doesn't have to be a woman. It doesn't have to be somebody in your field. It just has to be somebody who actually cares about your success.
And when you find a mentor, treat them really well.
Yeah.
They're priceless.
And don't forget to look at emeriti faculty. They can be terrific mentors, and they don't have their own careers that they're worried about at the same time. So it's a very good source of help. And plus, they don't like to feel that emeritus means without merit. Mm-hmm. So they like to stay involved many times. I think we have time for one more question. Stop. Okay, I'm sorry. One more? We have time for one more question or comment if someone, yeah, please.
Hi. So when we talk about women's issues, one of the things people think about is sort of all this like unpaid labor that women are doing, at home, doing a lot of the housework. And I wonder if you think there's an analogy sort of to the university there. I come from a department where there's a lot of great women role models, right? Faculty members who are doing great research, they have a family, but they're also doing a lot of service to the university, and that sort of seems to be something they feel like is sometimes bogging them down, right? And maybe that's a good thing because then they end up in positions like yours where they're in the leadership, but maybe that's not their goal, and that as women they're being recruited to these more service-type positions that take time away from their other endeavors.
I guess, I think that as I mentor women, I think doing services is part of our job here, right? But with service, and like most other things, I try to encourage people to look for the 2-fers and 3-fers for the opportunity. Like, okay, what will being on that committee do for you? Who else will be on that committee? Is it a way to network with somebody that you want to get to know better? Will that lead to a policy or something maybe different here? Is it something you're passionate about? In other words, not to just blindly do it. And part of how you do that also is you volunteer before you're asked, right? You find out which committee on campus, say, you really want to get on. And you go and ask or you run to be on that, because in most circumstances in most departments, those who don't step up are going to get asked, and they're probably not going to get asked to do the choice things. Those will have been taken by the proactive volunteers. So, I think that, and then it's again looking at the balance. If your prize, keep your eyes on your prize is tenure, then you need to look at, if it doesn't have to do with my grants and my publications, maybe this is the time for less service. And then just one other thing related to that and so many other aspects of women's lives, I think we need to, it's not just learning how to say no, but for me anyway, one of the things that's helped me, because I don't like to say no, is to say, I'll do it on my terms, right? And that's one way too, like in other words, to say to the person who asked you to be on a committee, I would really like to serve on this committee. However, I have some major challenges over the next year or two or whatever, 6 months, whatever it is, but I would be willing to serve in a year. And that offer, at least for me, it feels better. I'm not just saying no, but I'm also putting my own needs of whatever my prize is that I'm working on first.
I agree. It is really important that all of us, men and women, are really mindful about the service that we do, and that we look at the service that we are passionate about and focus our efforts there. As a former chair of the Committee on Committees, I'm really conscious of this conflict, right? You ask more women and underrepresented faculty to serve because we really want diverse viewpoints on all of our committees so that everything is informed with a balanced view. But that can compromise women's, trajectory, academic trajectory. And so I would just recommend that women be really judicious in the use of their time, especially young women and assistant professors, and then maybe start to think about ramping it up as your career is well established. Certainly not as an assistant professor, maybe not even as an associate professor. When you're a full professor, you can start to take more risks and take heavier loads if you're passionate about things.
I think we're out of time, but thank you for attending this event, and thank you to our panelists. Thank you very much for coming.